The shot rang out across the dusty streets of Paradise, Nevada, sending a flock of startled crows into the sky as Meline Hayes pressed her back against the rough wooden wall of the general store. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird as she peered around the corner, watching her father's drunken figure stumble out of the saloon. She had exactly 10 minutes to gather her belongings and flee before he returned home, and discovered she'd taken the money he'd been saving, money that rightfully belonged to her mother before she died. Paradise was anything but for Meline. The year was 1878, and the small mining town had grown from a whisper on the map to a boisterous settlement following the silver strike of '74. Like many frontier towns, it had its share of good folks trying to build honest lives, but it also attracted men like her father, Victor Hayes, men who saw the West as a place where rules could be bent and broken, where their sins could be buried in the desert sand. Victor hadn't always been a monster. Before her mother's death 2 winters ago, he'd been stern but fair. The grief had transformed him, twisting something inside until the whiskey became his only companion and Meline his favorite target. At 21, she'd endured his deterioration longer than most would consider wise, but family loyalty ran deep in her veins. Until last night, the bruise blossoming on her cheekbone served as a stark reminder of his latest rage and his promise. "You try to leave, girl," he'd snarled, breath hot with bourbon, "and I'll put you in the ground beside your mother." Meline believed him. The cold certainty in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. She ducked into the alley, clutching her small carpet bag close. Inside was everything she owned that mattered. Her mother's silver hairbrush, a daguerreotype of happier times, a change of clothes, and the money, $300, that would buy her passage to San Francisco, where her mother's sister lived. It wasn't stealing, not really. Her mother had set aside that money for years, hiding it in a hollowed-out Bible. "For emergencies," she'd told Meline. "If this wasn't an emergency, nothing was. The stagecoach would arrive in 30 minutes. All she needed to do was stay hidden until then. 30 minutes to freedom." She didn't see the man rounding the corner until she collided with his broad chest, sending her bag tumbling to the ground. "Whoa there," came a deep voice, hands steadying her shoulders. Meline jerked back, eyes wide with alarm. Standing before her was a tall man with a weathered face that spoke of years under the harsh desert sun. His dark hair curled beneath a well-worn Stetson, and his eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, narrowed with concern when they landed on her bruised face. "You all right, miss?" he asked, bending to retrieve her fallen bag. "Fine," she said, snatching it back quickly. "Excuse me." He didn't move. "That's quite a mark you're sporting." "I fell." The lie came automatically, practiced, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Must have been quite a fall." A shout from the main street made her flinch, her father's voice bellowing her name. The stranger noticed her reaction, his expression shifting from curiosity to something harder. "Someone after you?" "No," she said, trying to edge past him. "I need to catch the stage." "Meline." Victor's voice was closer now. "Show yourself, girl. Think you can steal from me?" She froze, panic rising in her throat. The stranger's gaze flicked toward the voice, then back to her face. Something in his eyes changed, a decision made. "Name's Daniel Young," he said quietly. "Most folks call me Danny. I think you'd better come with me." "I don't know you," she whispered. "No, but I'm guessing I'm a sight better than whoever's looking for you." He nodded toward the livery stable across the street. "I've got a horse. Can get you to the next town before nightfall." Meline hesitated. Trust didn't come easily, not anymore. But the sound of her father's boots on the boardwalk made the decision for her. "Lead the way," she said. Danny nodded once, then guided her through the back alleys of Paradise, moving with the confidence of someone who knew how to stay unseen. They reached the livery stable without incident, and Danny quickly saddled a magnificent buckskin gelding. "We'll have to ride double," he said, tightening the cinch. "He's strong enough to carry us both until we can get you your own mount." Meline glanced nervously toward the stable door. "My father, he won't find us," Danny assured her, offering his hand to help her mount. "I know these hills better than most." As she settled behind him on the horse, arms tentatively circling his waist, Meline heard the commotion outside. Victor's angry voice carried clearly. "You seen my daughter? Blonde girl, blue dress." "Thieving little. Ain't seen nobody matching that description," came the reply from someone Meline couldn't see. Danny clicked his tongue, urging the horse through the back door of the stable just as Victor entered through the front. They slipped away, the gelding's hooves muffled in the soft dirt as they headed for the hills beyond Paradise. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, putting distance between themselves and the town. Medeline's mind raced with questions. Who was this man? Why was he helping her? What would happen when her father inevitably tracked them down? As if reading her thoughts, Danny finally spoke over his shoulder. "Want to tell me what's got you running scared from your own father?" Meline tightened her grip on her bag. "How do you know he's my father?" "Heard him call you by name, saw your reaction." He guided the horse around a stand of Joshua trees. "Plus, the family resemblance is there, though I reckon you got your looks from your mama." The mention of her mother sent a pang through her chest. He wasn't always like this. "After my mother died, grief changes some men," Danny finished for her. "Makes them mean." "Yes." The simple acknowledgement loosened something in her chest. "Last night he said if I ever tried to leave, he'd kill me. I believe him." Danny was quiet for a moment, the only sound the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the wind whistling through the sage. Then, with a certainty that sent a shiver down her spine, he said, "If he threatens your life again, then he'll answer to me." The words weren't boastful or dramatic, just a simple statement of fact, delivered in the same tone one might use to comment on the weather. But something in his voice told Meline he meant every word. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "I know enough." He pointed to a ridge in the distance. "There's a small homestead beyond that rise. Belongs to a widow named Sarah Jenkins. She'll give us shelter for the night, ask no questions. And tomorrow we figure out where you're heading and how to get you there safely." He glanced back at her, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Unless you've got other plans." Meline thought of her aunt in San Francisco, a woman she'd never met but who might offer sanctuary. But San Francisco was hundreds of miles away, through territory she didn't know. "I was going to catch the stage west," she admitted. "My mother's sister lives in San Francisco." Danny nodded. "That's still an option, but we'll need to circle back to a different town to get you on a stage. Your father will have telegraphed ahead to the stations near Paradise by now." The realization that her simple escape plan had become so complicated made Medeline's head spin. "Why are you helping me?" Danny was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of memories. "Had a sister once. Someone should have helped her." He left it at that, and Meline didn't press. They reached Sarah Jenkins' homestead just as the sun was setting, painting the desert in hues of gold and crimson. The widow was a small, wiry woman with a weathered face and shrewd eyes that took in Medeline's bruised cheek without comment. "Danny Young," she said, hands on her hips. "Bringing trouble to my doorstep again. Evening, Sarah." He dismounted and helped Meline down. "Just need a place to rest for the night." Sarah's gaze softened when it landed on Meline. "Well, come on in then. Got stew on the stove and fresh bread." The inside of the cabin was modest but spotlessly clean, with colorful quilts and dried herbs hanging from the beams. It smelled of sage and rosemary and something deliciously savory. Madeline's stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since the previous night. "Sit," Sarah instructed, gesturing to a rough-hewn table. "Both of you, I'll fetch bowls." As they ate, Sarah and Danny exchanged news of the territory who'd struck it rich, who'd moved on, which cattle baron was feuding with which sheep farmer. Normal conversation that made Madeline ache for the simple life she'd never had. "What's your plan, Danny?" Sarah asked finally, pushing away her empty bowl. "Need to get Miss Hayes to San Francisco," he replied. "Thought we might head to Hollow Creek, catch the westbound stage there." Sarah snorted. "Her daddy's got friends in Hollow Creek, you know that." Danny frowned. "Silver Springs, then." "Better." Sarah turned to Madeline. "You ever ride astride before, girl?" Madeline blinked at the abrupt change of subject. "Yes, when I was younger." "Good, because it's 3 days to Silver Springs and you can't ride side saddle through those mountains." She stood, collecting their bowls. "I've got an old saddle you can use, and some breeches that might fit you." The thought of wearing men's clothing made Madeline flush. "That's very kind, but nothing," Sarah interrupted. "Your virtue won't matter much if you're dead. Practicality first, propriety second. That's the rule out here." Madeline glanced at Danny, who was hiding a smile behind his coffee mug. "Sarah's right," he said, "and we'll need to move fast. Your father struck me as the persistent type." "He is," Madeline confirmed. "He once tracked a man for 2 weeks over a gambling debt." Danny and Sarah exchanged a look. "All the more reason to be prepared," Sarah said firmly. "Now, girl, you take the back room. Danny can sleep by the hearth." Despite her exhaustion, Madeline slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with her father's angry face and the sound of gunshots. She woke at dawn to find Sarah already up, frying bacon and brewing coffee. "Your friend's outside with the horses," Sarah told her, nodding toward a bundle of clothing on a chair. "Those should fit. There's a wash basin behind the screen." The men's clothing felt strange against her skin-rough canvas trousers, a faded cotton shirt, and a vest that had been taken in at the sides. But Sarah was right about one thing. They were far more practical for riding than her dress had been. When she stepped outside, Danny was adjusting the saddle on a dappled mare. He glanced up and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes' appreciation, quickly masked. "Sarah's giving you pepper," he said, patting the mare's neck. "She's steady and sure-footed, perfect for mountain trails." "I can't take her horse," Madeline protested. "You can and you will," Sarah said, coming out of the cabin with a bundle wrapped in oilskin. "Food for the journey, and this." She pressed a small revolver into Madeline's hands. "It was my husband's, know how to use it." Madeline stared at the weapon. "No, Danny will teach you." "Won't you, Danny?" he nodded, his expression serious. "First chance we get." They set off as the sun crested the eastern hills, Madeline astride Pepper, following Danny's buckskin. Sarah's farewell had been brief but heartfelt, a fierce hug and a whispered, "You find your way, girl. Don't let fear choose your path." Words to live by, if only Madeline could find the courage to follow them. They rode hard through the morning, stopping only to water the horses at a small creek around midday. Danny was quiet but vigilant, frequently scanning the horizon and doubling back to check their trail. His caution was contagious, and Madeline found herself jumping at every distant sound. "He won't give up easily," she said as they rested in the shade of a large boulder. "He's convinced the money is his." Danny handed her a strip of dried meat from their provisions. "Tell me about him. The more I know, the better prepared we'll be." Madeline chewed slowly, gathering her thoughts. "He came west from Boston when I was small. My mother was already expecting me when they married. He had dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines. And did he? No. He's a decent enough miner, but his real talent is cards. She took a sip from the canteen. He can read people knows when they're bluffing, when they're desperate. It's made him both wealthy and hated. Danny nodded, understanding. And when your mother died, pneumonia, 2 winters ago. Meline stared at her hands. He started drinking more after that, gambling bigger stakes. Getting into fights. She touched her cheek unconsciously, taking his anger out on whatever was closest. And that was you. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go, because I kept hoping he'd remember who he used to be. She met Danny's gaze directly. But last night, when he threatened to kill me, I saw it in his eyes. My father is gone. There's just Victor now. Danny's expression hardened. No man has the right to threaten his own child, no matter what grief he carries. He'll come after me, she said quietly. Not just for the money, but because I defied him. He can't let that stand. Let him come. Danny stood, offering his hand to help her up. He'll find you're not alone anymore. The simple declaration, "you're not alone anymore," hit Meline with unexpected force. Since her mother's death, loneliness had been her constant companion, even in a town full of people. The idea that someone was standing with her, even a stranger with his own mysterious past, felt like the first breath after nearly drowning. They mounted up and continued their journey, the terrain gradually becoming more rugged as they approached the foothills that would lead them into the mountains. By late afternoon, Danny found them a sheltered spot to make camp, a small depression surrounded by boulders that would hide their fire from distant eyes. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he said, dismounting. "Then ride through the night. There's a full moon and we'll make better time when it's cooler." Meline slid from Pepper's back, her legs trembling with the unaccustomed exertion. "You're worried he's following?" Danny paused in unsaddling his horse. "I'm being cautious. That's different." But she could read the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon. He was worried and trying not to alarm her. "Teach me to use the gun," she said suddenly. He looked at her, assessing. "It's noisy, might attract attention. Then teach me without firing it." "Please." She met his gaze steadily. "I won't be helpless, Danny, not anymore." Something like approval flickered across his face. "All right, once we've tended to the horses." After caring for their mounts and eating a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Danny showed Meline how to hold the revolver, how to check if it was loaded, how to aim. "It's got a kick," he warned. "When we do fire it, be ready for that. And remember, you don't pull a gun unless you're prepared to use it." "Have you?" she asked softly. "Used one on a person, I mean." His expression closed off slightly. "Yes." Meline wanted to ask more, but sensed it wasn't the time. Instead, she focused on his instructions, practicing the motion of drawing, aiming, and dry firing until her arms ached. "That's enough for now," Danny finally said. "You should rest while you can." Meline nodded, tucking the revolver into the belt at her waist. She rolled herself in the blanket Sarah had provided, using her saddle as a pillow as she'd seen Danny do. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. "Danny," she whispered, seeing he was still awake, staring at the stars. Thank you for helping me." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not respond. Then, softly, "Everyone deserves a chance to choose their own path, Meline, even if the choosing isn't easy." She pondered his words as she drifted off, wondering what difficult choices had shaped the man beside her. They rode through the night as planned, the full moon illuminating their path through the increasingly mountainous terrain. Danny set a steady pace, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of knowledge about the territory. Meline found herself watching him, the confident way he sat in the saddle, how he seemed to notice everything around them. the rare smile that transformed his serious face when she said something that amused him. By dawn, they had climbed high enough that Meline could look back and see the vast expanse of desert they'd crossed. Paradise was somewhere beyond the horizon now, but the knowledge brought little comfort. Victor was still out there, and he knew these territories as well as Danny did. They made camp in a stand of pines near a small spring, the horses grateful for the sweet water and chance to rest. Madeline's entire body ached from the unaccustomed riding, but she refused to complain. This was the price of freedom, and she would pay it gladly. As Danny built a small fire to cook breakfast, real coffee and flapjacks from the supplies Sarah had provided, Meline took the opportunity to wash her face and hands in the spring. The cool water was heaven against her skin, and she found herself wishing for a proper bath. "We should reach Silver Springs by nightfall tomorrow," Danny called from the fire. "There'll be a hotel there, hot water, real beds." The prospect was almost too wonderful to contemplate. "And the stage runs every Tuesday and Friday. Will be in time for Friday's departure." Meline returned to the fire, accepting the tin plate he offered. "And what will you do after you've seen me safely onto the stage?" Danny shrugged, pouring coffee into 2 dented cups. "Haven't thought that far ahead. You must have somewhere you call home." A shadow crossed his face. "Not for a long while." He handed her a cup. "Used to have a small ranch down near the border, cattle mostly, some horses." "What happened?" He sipped his coffee, eyes distant. "War happened, came home to find it burned. Started drifting after that, taking work where I could find it. Cowhand sometimes, bounty hunter when times were lean." The revelation surprised her. "Is that what you were doing in Paradise, hunting bounties?" "No." His lips quirked in a half-smile. "Just passing through, was heading to Carson City. Heard they need men for a cattle drive up to Montana territory." Meline tried to imagine him back on his ranch before whatever hardships had carved those lines around his eyes. "Do you miss it? Having a home?" "Sometimes." He set down his cup, expression thoughtful. "But home isn't just a place, Meline. It's a feeling, security, belonging. Haven't found that in a while." The wistfulness in his voice struck a chord in her. Her mother had given her that sense of home, of belonging. Since her death, Meline had been adrift, even while still living in the same house. "I hope you find it again," she said softly. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. 2 people searching for something they'd lost. The moment was broken by a distant sound, a crack that echoed through the mountains. Danny was on his feet instantly, hand on his revolver. "Rifle shot," he said, voice low. "Could be a hunter." Madeline's heart raced. "Or my father. Stay here." Danny moved silently to the edge of their small clearing, scanning the slopes below. After a tense minute, he returned. "Can't see anything, but that doesn't mean much in this terrain." "What do we do?" he considered, brow furrowed. "We move. Now. Leave the fire burning might make them think we're still here." They packed swiftly, erasing signs of their presence as best they could before mounting up. Instead of continuing on the trail they'd been following, Danny led them higher into the mountains, through dense stands of pine where their horses' hooves were muffled by thick carpets of needles. "This route is longer," he explained in a hushed voice, "but harder to track. And it gives us the high ground we'll see anyone coming before they see us." They rode in tense silence for hours, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. Danny's vigilance was unceasing, and Meline found herself constantly scanning their back trail, jumping at every sound. By late afternoon, they'd reached a high ridge that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding territory. Danny dismounted, helping Meline down before leading the horses to a small grassy area where they could graze. "We'll wait here until dark," he said, settling beside her on a flat boulder. If someone is tracking us, they'll have a hard time following our trail in the dark. Meline nodded, trying to ignore the gnawing fear in her stomach. Do you really think it's him? Danny's expression was grave. Can't be sure. But in my experience, coincidences are rare in the mountains. She drew her knees to her chest, suddenly cold despite the afternoon sun. I never thought he'd actually track me this far. It's just money. It's not about the money, Danny said quietly. It's about control. Men like your father can't stand losing it. How do you know what kind of man he is? You barely met him. Danny's eyes darkened. I've known men like him my whole life, Meline. Men who think their strength gives them the right to take what they want, to hurt those weaker than themselves. His hand clenched into a fist. My own father was cut from the same cloth. The admission surprised her. Danny had revealed so little about himself that this glimpse into his past felt significant. Is that why you're helping me? Because of your father? He was quiet for a moment, gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Partly, he finally admitted. And partly because of my sister, like I said. Kate was 16 when a man twice her age took a shine to her. Father approved the man had money, influence, when Kate refused him. He trailed off, jaw tightening. Father beat her so badly she couldn't walk for days. Said she'd marry who he chose or suffer worse. Meline felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. What happened? She ran, middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on her back. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Meline could sense the pain beneath. I was 14. Too young to help her, too afraid to try. Did you ever find her? No. The single word held a weight of regret. Got a letter once, years later. She was in San Francisco working as a seamstress. Said she was happy. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Always had clever fingers, Kate did. Could mend anything. And your father, Danny's expression hardened, died in the war, Confederate side. Can't say I mourned him. Meline hesitated, then placed her hand gently on his arm. I'm sorry about Kate. He covered her hand with his own briefly, a fleeting touch that sent warmth through her veins. Ancient history now, but when I saw you in that alley with that bruise on your face and fear in your eyes. He shook his head. Couldn't walk away, not this time. The vulnerability in his admission touched something deep within her. This man, who projected such strength and confidence, carried his own wounds, his own regrets. It made her trust him more, somehow, knowing he understood her fear from the inside out. They remained on the ridge until dusk, sharing the last of their food and watching the sun sink toward the western horizon. As the shadows lengthened, Danny helped Meline back onto Pepper. We'll travel through the night again, he said, mounting his own horse. Should reach Silver Springs by dawn if we push hard. The journey through the darkness was nerve-wracking. The moon was hidden behind clouds for much of the night, forcing them to rely on Danny's knowledge of the terrain and the horse's sure-footedness. They spoke little, conserving energy and staying alert for any signs of pursuit. It was in the darkest hour, just before dawn, that they heard it, the unmistakable sound of horses moving through the underbrush below their position. Danny immediately reined in, signaling Meline to do the same. They listened, motionless, as the sounds grew closer. 3 riders, maybe 4, Danny whispered, leaning close, moving fast. It's him, Meline said with certainty. He wouldn't come alone. Danny nodded grimly. We need to get off this trail. Now. He led them into a dense thicket of pine and scrub oak, the branches scratching at Meline's face and arms as they pushed through. They emerged in a small clearing on the other side, barely visible in the pre-dawn gloom. We can't outrun them, Danny said, dismounting and helping Meline down. Not with the horses this tired. We'll have to hide and let them pass. He quickly unsaddled both horses and used branches to brush away their tracks leading into the thicket. Then he removed his bandana and tied it loosely around Pepper's neck. "This will keep her close to my gelding," he explained. "They're familiar with each other now." He gave both horses a firm slap on the rump, sending them trotting away from the clearing. "They'll follow the easier path down the mountain. With luck, your father and his men will follow their trail instead of ours." Meline watched the horses disappear into the trees. "What about us?" Danny took her hand, leading her deeper into the forest. "There's a ravine up ahead. Good place to wait them out." The ravine proved to be more of a narrow fissure in the mountainside, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through sideways. It opened into a small cavern-like space, sheltered from view and wind. "It's an old bear den," Danny explained, moving cautiously into the space. "Long abandoned, from the look of it." Meline followed, trying to control her trembling. Not from cold, though the morning air was chill, but from fear. The reality of their situation was setting in. Her father and his men were close, and they were now on foot in rough country, miles from the nearest town. "What if they find us?" she whispered as Danny settled beside her in the small space. "They won't," he assured her, but his hand rested on his revolver nonetheless. "And if they do, I won't let them take you. I promise." She believed him. In the short time she'd known him, Danny had proven himself trustworthy in ways few people in her life ever had. He'd risked his own safety for a stranger, asked for nothing in return, and treated her with a respect that was foreign to her after years under her father's thumb. They sat in silence as dawn broke, painting the sky visible through the entrance to their hideaway with streaks of pink and gold. The beauty seemed at odds with their predicament, a reminder that the world continued on its course regardless of human troubles. "Danny," Meline whispered after a time, if we get out of this, when we get out of this." She corrected herself, trying to borrow some of his quiet confidence. "What will you do? Will you still go to Carson City?" He was quiet for a moment. "Not sure. Plans have a way of changing on you out here. Because of me." The question came out smaller than she'd intended. His eyes met hers in the dim light. "Because life isn't a straight trail, Meline. It's full of forks and bends you never see coming." Before she could respond, the sound of voices reached them, distant at first, then growing closer. Danny tensed, placing a finger to his lips before silently drawing his revolver. Meline reached for her own hand, trembling slightly as she wrapped her fingers around the grip. "Must have gone this way," a voice drifted to them. "Tracks lead down toward the valley." "Could be anybody's tracks," another voice argued. "These mountains are full of prospectors and trappers." The third voice froze Madeline's blood. "It's her, I know it." Victor's voice, hard and determined. "She's not clever enough to cover her trail for long." They were close, just on the other side of the thicket that concealed the entrance to the ravine. Meline hardly dared breathe, pressing herself back against the cool stone wall. "We've been riding all night, Victor," the first voice complained. "Horses are about done in. Maybe we should head down to Silver Springs, see if they show up there." "You can go if you want, Harmon," Victor snapped. "I'm not stopping until I find her, and that cowboy who took her." "Wasn't no kidnapping from what folks said," the man called Harmon replied. "Girl went willingly enough." "She's not of sound mind," Victor said dismissively. "Grief over her mother addled her brain, made her steal from her own father." Meline felt anger rise in her chest, hot and sudden. How dare he use her mother's memory to paint her as unstable? How dare he twist the truth to serve his purposes? Danny must have sensed her reaction, because his hand found hers in the dimness, squeezing gently. A silent reminder to stay calm, to stay quiet. The voices moved away, becoming indistinct as Victor and his companions continued down the mountainside. Even after they could no longer hear them, Danny and Meline remained still, waiting to ensure they were truly gone. Finally, Danny holstered his revolver. "They're following the horse's trail. That buys us some time." "They'll realize eventually," Meline said, "when they don't find us. By then, we'll be on a different route." He shifted, peering out through the narrow entrance to their hiding place. "We need to move while we have daylight. It's about 15 miles to Silver Springs on foot, through rough country." The prospect was daunting, but Meline nodded resolutely. "I can make it." Danny's eyes crinkled with a smile. "I believe you can. You're stronger than you know, Meline Hayes." The simple vote of confidence warmed her more than she would have expected. For so long, she'd been told she was weak, helpless, incapable of managing without her father's guidance. To have someone, especially someone as self-sufficient as Danny, see strength in her was novel and deeply affecting. They emerged cautiously from their hiding place, Danny leading the way through the dense forest. Instead of following the trail down the mountain as Victor and his men had done, Danny led them along the ridgeline, staying high where they could see the approaches below. The going was rough. Without horses, they had to navigate steep slopes and dense underbrush on foot. Carrying what supplies they could salvage in a single pack, Danny had managed to grab before sending the horses away. By midday, Medeline's legs were burning with fatigue, and her city-soft hands were scraped raw from scrambling over rocks. Danny called a halt near a small spring, insisting she rest and drink. "You're doing well," he told her, handing her a strip of jerky from their dwindling supplies. "Better than most city folk would in these conditions." "Paradise hardly qualifies as a city," she said with a wan smile, "but thank you." He settled beside her on a fallen log, scanning the valley below for any sign of pursuit. "Your father said something back there. About your mother's death causing you grief." Meline stiffened. "It did, but not in the way he implied." "Tell me about her." The question was gentle, an invitation rather than a demand. Meline found herself wanting to share, to have someone else know the woman who had shaped her life. "She was kind," she began. "Even when life wasn't kind to her, she loved poetry, would recite it while she worked. Tennyson was her favorite." A sad smile touched her lips. "She married my father because she was carrying me and had few options. But she made the best of it, even when he started drinking, even when the money ran short." "Sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was." Meline traced patterns in the dirt with a stick. "She taught me to read, to cipher. Said education was the only thing no one could take from you." She glanced at Danny. "What about your mother?" A shadow crossed his face. "Died when I was young. Fever, don't remember much about her except she sang. All the time, even when there wasn't much to sing about." "I'm sorry," he shrugged, but the gesture couldn't hide the old pain in his eyes. "Long time ago." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, each lost in memories. Then Danny stood, offering his hand to help her up. "We should keep moving. Want to clear this ridge before nightfall." They continued their journey, the terrain growing increasingly difficult as they traversed the ridgeline. By late afternoon, Meline was exhausted, stumbling over roots and rocks, but she refused to complain. Every mile they covered was another mile between her and her father. As dusk approached, Danny found them a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging rock, protected from the wind and hidden from casual observation. He built a small fire, just enough to take the edge off the mountain chill, and they shared the last of their food. "We should reach Silver Springs by midday tomorrow," he said, studying the valley lights twinkling in the distance. "There's a small settlement at the base of this ridge where we might be able to hire horses in the morning." Meline nodded, too tired for conversation. Now that they had stopped moving, every muscle in her body ached, and the scratches on her hands and face stung sharply. She must have looked as miserable as she felt, because Danny rummaged in the pack and produced a small tin. "Sarah's salve," he explained, opening it to reveal a fragrant ointment. "Good for cuts and burns." He hesitated, then added, "May I?" The request was so courteous, so different from her experiences with men, that Meline found herself nodding before she'd fully processed the implications. Danny moved closer, gently taking one of her hands in his. His touch was careful as he applied the salve to her scraped palms, his calloused fingers a contrast to the smoothness of the ointment. "Other hand," he murmured, and she complied, oddly moved by the simple act of care. When he finished with her hands, he dabbed a bit of salve on the scratches on her face, his touch feather-light. Meline found herself holding her breath, acutely aware of his closeness, of the scent of pine and leather that clung to him, of the way the firelight caught in his dark hair. "Thank you," she whispered when he'd finished. He met her gaze, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, that this was no longer simply about a stranger helping someone in need. There was a connection forming, tenuous but undeniable. Danny cleared his throat, breaking the moment as he moved back to his side of the fire. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." Meline nodded, wrapping herself in the blanket he offered. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive, her mind racing with thoughts of her father's pursuit, of the uncertain future that awaited her in San Francisco, and of the man who slept across the fire from her, a virtual stranger who had risked everything to help her. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke with a start to Danny's hand on her shoulder, his voice urgent in her ear. "Riders coming up the trail," he whispered. "Get up, quickly." The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, the first hint of dawn breaking over the mountains. Meline scrambled to her feet, heart pounding as she strained to hear what Danny had detected. After a moment, she caught at the distant sound of horses laboring up the steep trail. "How did they find us?" she whispered, panic rising in her throat. "Doesn't matter now," Danny said grimly, quickly gathering their meager belongings. "We need to move. Stay low and follow me." He led her away from their camp, staying within the tree line as they moved parallel to the ridge. The sound of horses grew louder, accompanied by men's voices carried on the morning air. "I told you they'd head for the ridge," Victor's voice drifted to them, triumphant. "She always was predictable." Medeline's blood ran cold. How could he know her so well and yet understand her so little? Danny pulled her behind a large boulder as the riders came into view on the trail below their position. Victor was in the lead, his face set in lines of grim determination. Behind him rode 3 men, Meline recognized from Paradise, all hard men who frequented her father's gambling table and did his bidding when required. They watched in tense silence as the riders passed their hiding spot. When they had gone perhaps 50 yards further along the ridge, Danny tugged Medeline's hand. "Now," he whispered, "while they're ahead of us, we'll cut down to the valley." They moved as quickly as they dared, half sliding down the steep slope toward the valley floor. The descent was treacherous, loose rock and shale that shifted underfoot, threatening to send them tumbling down the mountainside. More than once, Meline would have fallen if not for Danny's steady hand guiding her. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the valley floor when a shout rang out above them. "There they are!" Meline looked up to see Victor pointing down at them from the ridge, his face contorted with rage even at a distance. He spurred his horse along the ridgeline, seeking a path down to intercept them. "Run," Danny ordered, and they abandoned caution, scrambling down the slope as fast as they could manage. They reached the tree line at the base of the mountain just as Victor, and his men found a path down. The sound of horses crashing through the underbrush behind them spurred Meline to greater speed, adrenaline temporarily overriding her exhaustion. Danny led her through the forest, zigging and zagging through the trees in an attempt to make pursuit on horseback more difficult. It worked. To an extent they could hear Victor and his men cursing as branches whipped their faces and the uneven ground forced them to slow their mounts. But men on horseback, even slowed, would eventually overtake people on foot. It was simple mathematics, and Meline knew it. So did Danny, judging by the grim set of his jaw. They burst from the tree line into a small clearing, and Danny abruptly changed direction, pulling Meline toward a tumble-down cabin nearly hidden in the trees on the far side. "Old Trapper's place," he explained breathlessly as they ran. "Might buy us some time." They reached the cabin just as the first rider emerged from the forest behind them. Danny shoved Meline through the doorway, following close behind. The interior was a single room, dusty and abandoned with a collapsed roof at one end. "Out the back," Danny directed, moving toward the gap in the roof. "Quick, before they surround us." But it was too late. As they reached the rear wall, they heard Victor's voice outside. "We know you're in there, Meline. There's no way out." Danny drew his revolver, expression deadly serious. "Stay behind me," he ordered, moving toward one of the cabin's grimy windows. Through the dirt-streaked glass, Meline could see Victor and his 3 companions dismounting, spreading out to surround the small structure. All were armed, Victor with a shotgun, the others with rifles or revolvers. "Come out now and nobody needs to get hurt," Victor called. "I just want what's mine." Danny's jaw tightened. "I count 4 of them. Bad odds in an open fight." "What do we do?" Meline whispered, fear clawing at her throat. Before Danny could answer, Victor's voice came again, closer this time. "I'm talking to you, Cowboy. Send my daughter out and you can ride away. This isn't your fight." Danny moved to the door, positioning himself to see out while remaining mostly hidden. "The lady doesn't want to go with you," he called back, his voice steady. "Why don't you respect her wishes and turn around?" A harsh laugh was the response. "Lady, she's a thieving girl who needs a firm hand, nothing more." "She's a grown woman making her own choices," Danny countered. "And she chooses freedom from you." There was a moment of tense silence. Then Victor's voice, deadly calm. "Last chance, Cowboy. Send her out or we burn the cabin with both of you in it." Meline gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She'd known her father could be cruel, but this level of callousness, the willingness to kill his own daughter rather than lose control of her, was shocking even to her. Danny's expression hardened. "If you threaten her life again," he called out, voice carrying clearly in the morning air, "then you'll answer to me." The declaration hung in the air for a heartbeat. Then Victor's voice, incredulous. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "Someone who recognizes a bully when he sees one." Danny shifted, eyes scanning the area outside the cabin. "Someone who's faced down worse than you and lived to tell about it." Meline could almost feel her father's rage from inside the cabin. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by a stranger. "You've got 1 minute to send her out," Victor shouted, "or we start shooting." Danny turned to Meline, his expression grave. "I need you to trust me," he said quietly. "Can you do that?" She nodded without hesitation. "Yes, good." He gestured toward the collapsed section of roof. "When I give the word, I want you to run out that way, head for the trees. Don't stop, don't look back, just run." Her heart raced. "What about you?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'll be right behind you." She wanted to believe him, but the odds were overwhelming. 4 armed men against one, with no cover in the clearing between the cabin and the forest. "Danny, trust me, Meline." His eyes held hers, steady and sure. "I won't let him take you, not while I'm breathing." The conviction in his voice steadied her. She nodded again, positioning herself near the collapsed roof, ready to run. Danny moved back to the door, revolver in hand. "We're coming out," he called. "Don't shoot." "Smart decision," Victor replied, smugness evident in his tone. Danny opened the door slowly, stepping out with his hands raised, revolver dangling from one finger to show he wasn't an immediate threat. Meline couldn't see what was happening, but she could hear Victor's voice closer now. "Where is she?" "Right behind me," Danny answered. "But before she comes out, I want your word she won't be harmed." A derisive snort. "You're hardly in a position to make demands, Cowboy." "Maybe not," Danny agreed, his voice so casual it was almost conversational. "But I reckon I can take at least 2 of you with me if things go bad." "You willing to bet your life you won't be one of them?" The tension in the air was palpable even from inside the cabin. Meline held her breath, waiting. "Fine," Victor finally spat. "She won't be harmed. Now bring her out." Danny whistled a sharp, distinctive sound that Meline hadn't heard from him before. She tensed, wondering if this was the signal he'd mentioned. Then all hell broke loose. The sound of hoofbeats thundered across the clearing, accompanied by shouts of alarm from Victor and his men. Gunshots rang out and Danny's voice cut through the chaos. "Now, Meline, run!" She didn't hesitate, scrambling through the gap in the roof and sprinting for the tree line. Behind her, she could hear more gunfire, men shouting, horses whinnying in panic. She reached the trees and risked a glance back. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. Horses their horses. Pepper and Danny's buckskin had galloped into the clearing, causing confusion among Victor and his men. Danny had used the distraction to dive for cover behind a water trough, from where he was returning fire, keeping the men pinned down. Even as she watched, he broke from cover, running in a zigzag pattern toward the forest. Victor raised his shotgun, taking aim at Danny's back. Without thinking, Meline drew the revolver Sarah had given her. The weight was unfamiliar in her hand, but she remembered Danny's instructions. "Aim for the center. Squeeze, don't pull," she fired. The recoil was stronger than she'd expected, jerking her arm upward. Her shot went wide, but it had the desired effect. Victor ducked, his own shot going astray, and Danny reached the safety of the trees. He grabbed her arm, pulling her deeper into the forest. "Good shooting," he panted, grinning despite the danger. "Though we'll need to work on your aim." "The horses, how did you?" "Whistle I taught my gelding years ago," he explained as they ran. "Hoped he'd remember, hoped Pepper would follow him." Behind them, they could hear Victor and his men regrouping, preparing to pursue them into the forest. But they had a head start now, and the trees provided cover that would make shooting difficult. They ran until Medeline's lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out. Danny finally called a halt beside a small stream, allowing her a moment to catch her breath. "They're still coming," he said, reloading his revolver. "But we're close to the settlement I mentioned. Once we reach it, your father won't risk causing trouble. Too many witnesses." Meline nodded, trying to control her ragged breathing. "That whistle trick, that was incredible." Danny shrugged, but she could see he was pleased. "Old cavalry technique, never thought I'd use it again." "You were in the cavalry, Union, joined up in '62 after my ranch was burned." His expression darkened briefly. "Let's keep moving, we're not safe yet." They continued through the forest, moving as quickly as Medeline's exhausted body would allow. The trees began to thin, and soon they could see smoke from chimneys in the distance, the settlement Danny had mentioned. They were perhaps half a mile from the outskirts when they heard horses approaching from behind. Victor and his men had gained ground, moving faster through the forest than Meline and Danny could on foot. "We can't outrun them," Meline said, panic rising in her voice. Danny surveyed their surroundings, making a quick decision. "This way," he said, pulling her toward a rocky outcropping that provided some cover. We make our stand here. Stand, Meline echoed, her voice rising. They outnumber us 4-1. Numbers aren't everything, Danny replied, checking his revolver one last time. Position matters. So does motivation. He met her gaze steadily. They're fighting for money. We're fighting for your freedom. That counts for something. Before she could respond, Victor's voice rang out from the trees. I see you there, behind those rocks. It's over, Meline. Come back where you belong. Danny positioned himself at the edge of their cover, revolver ready. Your father threatened your life, he reminded her quietly. That makes this my fight, too. Meline felt a surge of gratitude, and something else, something warmer that made her heart race for reasons unrelated to fear. This man, who barely knew her, was willing to risk everything to protect her freedom, her choices. No one had ever stood up for her that way before. Victor Hayes, Danny called, his voice carrying clearly through the forest. The lady has made her choice. Turn around and ride away while you still can. Victor's laugh was harsh. And if I don't, Danny's expression turned deadly serious. Then you'll answer to me. The declaration hung in the air for a long moment. Then Victor's voice filled with contempt. You and what army, Cowboy? This one, came a new voice, and Meline turned to see a group of mounted men emerging from the direction of the settlement. 5 riders, all armed, led by a gray-haired man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. Victor and his companions froze, caught between Danny and Medeline's position and the newcomers. Morning, Sheriff, Danny called, a hint of relief in his voice. Danny Young, the sheriff replied, tipping his hat. Heard there was trouble up this way. Should have known you'd be in the middle of it. Victor recovered quickly, adopting an aggrieved expression as he addressed the sheriff. This man has abducted my daughter, Sheriff. I'm simply trying to bring her home. The sheriff looked at Meline, his gaze taking in her bruised face, now faded to yellowish green. That true, miss? This man forced you to go with him? Meline straightened her spine, finding courage in Danny's steady presence beside her. No, Sheriff. I left of my own free will. My father threatened to kill me if I tried to leave him. Danny helped me escape. Victor's face contorted with rage. She's lying. The girl's not right in the head. Grief over her mother's death has affected her mind. I'm perfectly sane, Meline countered, her voice stronger now. And I'm 21 years old enough to make my own decisions. The sheriff studied them both, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Finally, he turned to Victor. Seems to me the young lady's made her choice, mister, and she's of age to do so. She stole money from me, Victor protested. $300. It was my mother's money, Meline said firmly. She saved it for years, hid it from him so he wouldn't gamble it away or drink it away. She meant it for me. The sheriff sighed, clearly wishing he hadn't ridden into this family dispute. Look, I don't know who's telling the truth about the money, and frankly, it's not my jurisdiction. What I do know is there's been gunplay, and that is my concern. He fixed Victor with a stern look. I suggest you and your friends turn around and head back where you came from. The stage leaves for Carson City this afternoon. I recommend you be on it. Victor's face flushed dark with anger. You can't do this. She's my daughter. She's a grown woman, the sheriff interrupted, who clearly doesn't want to go with you. Now I'm giving you a choice. Leave peacefully or spend some time in my jail while I sort this out. He patted the rifle resting across his saddle. Your decision. For a moment, Meline thought her father might actually challenge the sheriff. Then, with a look of pure hatred directed at her and Danny, he jerked his horse's head around. This isn't over, he spat. I'll find you, Meline, wherever you go. Danny stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Meline and her father. If you come near her again, he said quietly, you'll regret it for whatever remains of your life. There was something in his tone, a deadly certainty that seemed to penetrate even Victor's rage. A flash of fear crossed the older man's face before he mastered it. Without another word, he wheeled his horse and rode away, his companions following reluctantly behind. The sheriff waited until they were out of sight before turning to Danny and Meline. "You two all right?" Danny nodded, holstering his revolver. "Thanks to your timely arrival, Tom," the sheriff grunted. "Got word from Sarah Jenkins that you might be headed this way with trouble on your tail." He eyed Meline curiously. She didn't mention the trouble was quite so pretty. Meline felt herself blush, unused to compliments after years of her father's criticism. Danny smiled, the tension of the confrontation easing from his shoulders. "Tom, this is Meline Hayes. Meline, Sheriff Tom Blackwell, an old friend." "Pleased to meet you, Sheriff," Meline said. "And thank you for your help." "Just doing my job, miss." The sheriff glanced at the retreating figures of Victor and his men. "Don't think your father's the type to give up easily, though." "No," Meline agreed. "He's not." "All the more reason to get you to Silver Springs and onto that stage as planned," Danny said. The sheriff nodded. "I've got a spare mount you can use," he told Meline. "We should make Silver Springs by midday, plenty of time for the afternoon stage." As they rode toward the settlement, Meline found herself watching Danny, who rode slightly ahead with the sheriff. There was an easy camaraderie between the two men that spoke of shared history. It was yet another glimpse into the complex man who had risked so much to help her. The settlement turned out to be little more than a collection of cabins clustered around a trading post, but the inhabitants were friendly, offering Meline and Danny hot coffee and fresh bread, while the sheriff arranged for their transportation to Silver Springs. As they ate, Meline finally asked the question that had been nagging at her since the confrontation with her father. "How do you know Sheriff Blackwell?" Danny smiled, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Served together in the war. He was my commanding officer for a time. Good man in a tight spot." "He seems to think the same of you." Danny shrugged, a hint of color touching his cheeks at the implied compliment. "We've pulled each other out of trouble a few times. Like today." "Like today," he agreed. There was something in his expression, a hesitancy she hadn't seen before that made Medeline's heart beat a little faster. She sensed he had something more to say, but was holding back. Before she could press him, the sheriff returned, announcing that horses were ready and they should head out if they wanted to reach Silver Springs in time for the stage. The ride to Silver Springs was uneventful, though the sheriff posted one of his deputies to ride behind them, keeping watch for any sign of Victor's return. They reached the town shortly after noon, its bustling main street a stark contrast to the quiet forest they'd traveled through. Silver Springs was larger than Paradise, boasting several hotels, a bank, and even a small theater. The sheriff led them directly to the stage coach office, where they learned the westbound stage would depart at 4 o'clock, with plenty of seats available. "You've got a few hours to rest and get cleaned up," the sheriff told Meline as Danny purchased her ticket. "The Silver Dollar Hotel has hot baths and decent rooms." The prospect of a hot bath was so enticing that Meline nearly wept with gratitude. After thanking the sheriff profusely, she and Danny made their way to the hotel, where a sympathetic clerk arranged for a room and bath for Meline and a separate room for Danny. "I'll meet you in the dining room in 2 hours," Danny told her as they parted in the hotel hallway. "Get some rest." The hot bath was everything Meline had dreamed of during their difficult journey. She soaked until the water cooled, washing away the dirt and sweat of their trek through the mountains. The hotel had even provided soap that smelled of lavender, a small luxury that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Wrapped in a towel, She examined the clothing Sarah had given her. The men's attire had served its purpose on the trail, but now that they were in town, Meline longed for something more feminine. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Yes," she called cautiously. "It's the hotel maid, miss," came a young woman's voice. "Mr. Young asked me to bring you something." Meline opened the door a crack to find a young woman holding a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "He said you might need these, miss," the maid explained, handing over the package. Inside, Meline found a simple but elegant blue dress, undergarments, and even a pair of women's boots in approximately her size. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought a lump to her throat. When had anyone last considered her needs and comfort so carefully? She dressed carefully, grateful that the dress fit well enough, though it was a bit loose in the waist. Her hair, freed from its practical braid, dried into soft waves around her face as she gazed at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman who looked back at her seemed different, somehow older, perhaps, or simply more self-possessed than the frightened girl who had fled paradise just days ago. When she descended to the hotel dining room, she found Danny waiting for her, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He stood as she approached, his eyes widening slightly as they took in her transformation. "You look," he began, then seemed at a loss for words. "Thank you for the dress," she said, saving him from his momentary speechlessness. "It was very thoughtful." He pulled out her chair, a gesture of courtesy that touched her. "Thought you might want something more suitable for travel than Sarah's old work clothes." They ordered a hearty meal, their first proper one in days, and as they ate, Meline found herself studying Danny across the table. He seemed different in this civilized setting, less the rugged frontiersman and more the gentleman. The contradiction fascinated her. "Will you go to Carson City after this?" she asked, returning to their earlier conversation. "For the cattle drive." Danny set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that." And he met her gaze directly. "San Francisco's a big city, might be hard for a young woman on her own, even with family there." Medeline's heart quickened. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting." He hesitated, then seemed to gather his resolve. "I'm suggesting that maybe you could use a friend, someone to make sure you reach your aunt safely, someone to help you get settled." The offer hung between them, its implications clear. This wasn't just about seeing her safely to San Francisco. This was Danny offering to stay, to be part of whatever new life she built there. "What about the cattle drive?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What about your plans?" "Plans change," he said simply. "Sometimes you find something more important than what you thought you wanted." The warmth that bloomed in Medeline's chest had nothing to do with the hot food or the comfortable surroundings. It was a feeling she'd almost forgotten was possible, the feeling of mattering to someone, of being valued. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Having a friend in San Francisco." Something flickered in Danny's eyes, relief, perhaps, or happiness. Then it settled. They finished their meal in companionable silence, both aware that something significant had shifted between them, though neither was quite ready to name it. After dinner, they still had an hour before the stage was set to depart. Danny suggested a walk through the town, and Meline readily agreed, glad for the chance to stretch her legs after the meal. Silver Springs was lively in the afternoon, with shoppers, businessmen, and families filling the boardwalks. It felt good to be among people again, to be just another face in the crowd rather than a fugitive hiding in the wilderness. They were passing the general store when Danny suddenly stiffened, his hand moving to Medeline's elbow in a protective gesture. Following his gaze, she saw what had alarmed him, one of her father's companions, the man called Harmon, emerging from the telegraph office across the street. "He hasn't seen us," Danny murmured, smoothly guiding Meline into the shelter of the general store's doorway. "But this isn't good if they're still in town." "They might try to stop the stage," Meline finished, fear clutching at her throat. Danny nodded grimly. "We need to warn the sheriff." They made their way cautiously to the sheriff's office, taking back alleys to avoid being spotted. Sheriff Blackwell listened to their concerns with a deepening frown. "I ordered them out of town," he said, clearly displeased. "But they've broken no laws yet that I can prove. Still, I'll have my deputies keep an eye on the stage departure, and I'll ride along as far as the county line, just to be sure." Meline thanked him, but anxiety gnawed at her as she and Danny headed for the stagecoach office. Despite the sheriff's assurances, she couldn't shake the feeling that her father wasn't done with her yet. They reached the stage depot with minutes to spare. The coach was already waiting, a sturdy Concorde with 6 horses harnessed and ready. 3 other passengers were boarding a middle-aged couple and a young man in a business suit. Sheriff Blackwell and 2 deputies arrived just as Meline and Danny approached the stage, their presence a reassuring sign that the departure would be protected. "No sign of your father or his men," the sheriff told them quietly, "but stay alert." Danny helped Meline into the coach, then paused before following. "Thank you, Tom," he said, extending his hand to the sheriff, "for everything." Sheriff Blackwell shook Danny's hand firmly. "You take care of this young lady, you hear? She's got spirit." "That she does," Danny agreed with a smile that made Medeline's cheeks warm. The other passengers watched this exchange with undisguised curiosity, but Meline was beyond caring what strangers thought. She was leaving paradise behind, leaving her father's control behind. Whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms. Danny settled beside her on the coach's leather seat, his solid presence a comfort as the driver called to the horses, and the stage lurched into motion. Sheriff Blackwell and his deputies rode alongside as they left Silver Springs, their vigilant eyes scanning the road ahead and the hills to either side. They had traveled perhaps 2 miles when the shot rang out. The bullet struck the coach's side with a splintering crack, sending the passengers into a panic. The middle-aged woman screamed, and her husband pulled her down below the window level. The young businessman turned pale but remained remarkably composed. "Everyone stay down," Danny ordered, drawing his revolver as he peered cautiously out the window. More shots followed, and the coach picked up speed, the driver clearly intent on outrunning the ambush. Sheriff Blackwell and his deputies returned fire, their shots echoing across the valley. Meline clutched her carpet bag, heart hammering against her ribs. So close, they had been so close to escaping. Her father's determination to reclaim her was terrifying in its intensity. The gunfire ceased as suddenly as it had begun. The coach continued at its breakneck pace for another mile before slowing to a more manageable speed. Sheriff Blackwell appeared at the window, his face grim. "All clear," he reported. "Your father and 2 others. They fired from the ridge but retreated when we returned fire. Lost one of my deputies, took a bullet in the shoulder, but he'll live." "I'm so sorry," Meline said, guilt washing over her. "This is all because of me." "No," the sheriff corrected firmly. "It's because your father can't accept that you're a grown woman with the right to make your own choices." "Don't take his sins on your shoulders, miss." Danny squeezed her hand, a silent echo of the sheriff's sentiment. "I'll continue with you to the county line," Sheriff Blackwell said. "After that, you're in Webster County. I've telegraphed ahead to Sheriff Patterson. There he'll meet you at the relay station." Meline thanked him, overwhelmed by the kindness of these men who were putting themselves at risk for a woman they barely knew. The journey continued without further incident. At the county line, Sheriff Blackwell bid them farewell with a warning to stay vigilant. At each subsequent relay station, local lawmen were waiting, having been alerted to the potential danger. By the time they reached the larger town of Bridgeport late that evening, Meline was exhausted from the constant tension. They would spend the night there before continuing on to Sacramento the next day, where they would transfer to another stage for the final leg to San Francisco. The hotel in Bridgeport was modest but clean. The other passengers scattered to their rooms, eager to put the day's excitement behind them. Meline found herself lingering in the small lobby with Danny, reluctant to part from him even for the few hours of sleep they desperately needed. "You should rest," he told her gently. "Tomorrow will be another long day." She nodded but still hesitated. "Danny, I never properly thanked you for everything." Most men would have walked away when they saw trouble coming. His eyes held hers, serious and sincere. "I'm not most men." "No," she agreed softly. "You're not." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Danny cleared his throat. "I'll walk you to your room," he said. "Make sure it's secure." Her room was at the end of a narrow hallway on the second floor. Danny checked it thoroughly, windows, closet, even under the bed, before pronouncing it safe. "I'm right across the hall," he told her, pausing at the door. "If you need anything, just call." Meline nodded, suddenly shy. "Good night, Danny." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded. "Good night, Meline." Sleep came more easily than she'd expected, the exhaustion of their journey finally catching up with her. She dreamed of wide open spaces, of freedom, and of blue eyes that truly saw her for perhaps the first time in her life. Morning came with pale sunlight streaming through the curtains, and the sounds of the town coming to life outside her window. Meline dressed quickly in the blue dress Danny had purchased for her, grateful again for his thoughtfulness. She found him in the hotel dining room, nursing a cup of coffee and studying a newspaper. He rose when he saw her, and once again she was struck by the natural courtesy he displayed, so at odds with the rough-and-tumble image of the Western man she'd grown up around. "Sleep well?" he asked as she joined him. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "No nightmares." "Good." He folded the newspaper, setting it aside. "Stage leaves in an hour. I've asked the local sheriff to check the road ahead, just to be safe." They ate breakfast quickly, both aware that the sooner they resumed their journey, the sooner they would be beyond Victor's reach. The stage was waiting when they emerged from the hotel, its fresh team of horses stamping impatiently in their traces. Their fellow passengers from the previous day were already aboard, greeting Meline and Danny with the camaraderie of those who have shared danger together. The middle-aged woman had even saved them seats, shooing away another would-be passenger to ensure Meline and Danny could sit together. The journey to Sacramento was blessedly uneventful. They arrived late in the afternoon, with enough time to secure passage on the evening stage to San Francisco. This final leg would be shorter, just 6 hours if the roads were good, and would deliver them to San Francisco shortly after midnight. As they waited for the San Francisco stage, Danny seemed unusually quiet. Meline watched him, sensing he was wrestling with something he hadn't yet shared. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked. He shook his head, then sighed. "Not wrong exactly, just thinking about what's ahead." "San Francisco," Meline said, understanding dawning. "You're having second thoughts about going?" "No." His denial was immediate and firm. "That's not it." "Then what?" Danny ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "Your aunt. She's expecting you, not some rough cowboy showing up at her door in the middle of the night." Meline smiled, relieved that this was his concern. "My aunt is the least conventional woman you'll ever meet, if my mother's stories are to be believed. She left Boston to follow a gold miner west, then started her own dressmaking business when he was killed in a cave-in. She'll welcome you warmly, I'm sure of it. Danny didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded. If you say so. The San Francisco stage departed on time, with only one other passenger, an elderly gentleman who promptly fell asleep, leaving Meline and Danny to converse quietly as the coach rolled through the gathering darkness. "Tell me about the ranch you had," Meline said, genuinely curious about his past. "Before the war." A shadow crossed his face, but he answered readily enough. "It wasn't much by some standards. 100 acres in the Texas Hill Country. Good water, decent grazing. I ran about 50 head of cattle, and I was breeding horses, 2-quarter horses with some thoroughbred lines." "It sounds wonderful." It was. His voice softened with memory. "Had a little cabin I built myself. Was adding to it, room by room, when the war came. Had plans for a proper house eventually." "You never thought about going back?" "After the war," he shook his head. "Nothing to go back to. Confederates burned it all when they found out I'd joined the Union side, killed what stock they couldn't drive off." "I'm sorry," Meline said, reaching for his hand. "That's a terrible loss." He shrugged, but his fingers tightened around hers. "It was a long time ago. I've had other opportunities since then. Never felt right somehow. And now, what would feel right now?" Danny looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the moonlight streaming through the coach window. "I'm still figuring that out." The simple admission, with all its uncertainty and possibility, touched something deep in Meline's heart. She'd spent so much of her life constrained by her father's expectations, by the narrow role society prescribed for women. The idea of simply figuring it out, of having the freedom to choose, to try, even to fail, was intoxicating. "Me too," she said softly. They fell into comfortable silence, hands still joined, as the stage rolled onward toward San Francisco and whatever future awaited them there. They reached the outskirts of San Francisco just after midnight, the city's lights glimmering like fallen stars in the distance. Meline felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation as they drew closer. This was it, the new beginning she'd risked everything to claim. Her aunt's house proved to be a narrow but elegant Victorian on a tree-lined street not far from the bustling center of the city. Despite the late hour, lights burned in the front windows, suggesting that Aunt Alina was either a night owl or had indeed received Meline's telegram sent from Bridgeport. The stage driver helped them down, unloading Meline's carpet bag and Danny's small pack, before continuing on to the central depot with the elderly passenger. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the house that represented Meline's new life. Danny seemed hesitant, shifting his weight from foot to foot in a rare display of uncertainty. "You don't have to come in," Meline told him, sensing his discomfort. "You've done more than enough already. You could find a hotel for the night and we could meet tomorrow." Danny shook his head. "I said I'd see you safely to your aunt's door, and I mean to do just that." Before she could respond, the front door of the house opened, spilling warm light onto the porch steps. A tall, slender woman with silver-streaked dark hair stood framed in the doorway, peering out into the night. "Meline," she called. "Is that you, child?" "Yes, Aunt Alina," Meline replied, moving toward the steps. "I'm sorry it's so late." Meline Hayes descended the steps with surprising agility for a woman Meline guessed to be in her 60s. She embraced her niece warmly, then stepped back to examine her face in the lamplight. "You have your mother's eyes," she said softly. "I've been waiting for this day for so long, my dear." Her gaze shifted to Danny, standing a respectful distance away. "And who is this handsome young man?" Meline felt herself blush at her aunt's directness. "This is Daniel Young. He's the reason I made it here safely. Danny, my Aunt Meline Hayes." Danny removed his hat, displaying the innate courtesy that continued to surprise Meline. "Madam, pleasure to meet you." Elinor studied him with shrewd eyes, then smiled. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Young. Anyone who helps my niece is a friend of mine." She gestured toward the house. "Please, both of you, come inside. It's far too late for either of you to be looking for other accommodations, and I have plenty of room." The interior of the house was as elegant as its exterior suggested, with polished hardwood floors, tasteful furnishings, and an atmosphere of comfortable prosperity. Elinor led them to a cozy sitting room where a fire burned in the grate despite the mild San Francisco night. "Sit, both of you," she instructed, bustling about to pour glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "You must be exhausted from your journey." She handed each of them a glass. "Brandy. The best medicine after a long journey, my husband always said." Meline sipped the fiery liquid, feeling its warmth spread through her tired limbs. Elinor settled into a chair opposite them, her keen eyes taking in everything from Medeline's borrowed dress to the worn quality of Danny's boots. "Now," she said, folding her hands in her lap, "I received your telegram saying you were coming, Meline, but it was rather short on details. Why don't you tell me what brings you to my doorstep after all these years, and why you needed an escort?" Meline hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. Elinor must have sensed her reluctance because her expression softened. "Your mother wrote to me regularly, you know." Her last letter, just before she died, expressed concern about Victor's behavior. She feared for you should anything happen to her. The knowledge that her mother had foreseen the danger brought tears to Medeline's eyes. "She was right to worry," she said quietly, and proceeded to tell her aunt everything: Victor's descent into drinking and violence, his threats, her escape, and Danny's intervention. Elinor listened without interruption, her face growing increasingly grave. When Meline finished, she turned to Danny. "It seems I owe you a great deal, Mr. Young," she said seriously. "More than I can ever repay." Danny shook his head. "I didn't do it for payment, madam." "No," Elinor agreed, a knowing look in her eye. "I can see that." There was something in her tone that made Meline blush again, though she couldn't quite say why. Elinor rose, smoothing her skirts. "It's late, and you both need rest. Meline, I've prepared your mother's old room for you. Mr. Young, there's a guest room at the end of the hall that should suit you." As they followed Elinor up the stairs, Meline found herself overwhelmed by the events of the past few days. From the desperate flight from paradise to this warm welcome in a San Francisco townhouse, it seemed almost like a dream. Elinor showed Danny to his room first, then led Meline further down the hall to a room with flowered wallpaper and a four-poster bed that looked heavenly to her exhausted body. "We'll talk more in the morning," Elinor said, embracing her niece once more. "Rest now, knowing you're safe." Safe. The word echoed in Medeline's mind as she prepared for bed. For the first time in years, she truly felt it, not just the absence of immediate danger, but the deeper security of being somewhere she was wanted, valued. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, waking only when sunlight streamed through the lace curtains of her room. For a moment, she was disoriented, expecting to see the rough walls of her room in paradise. Then memory returned, and with it a profound sense of relief. She dressed in her blue dress again, the only clothing she had, and made her way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and baking bread. She found Elinor in the kitchen, supervising a young maid who was preparing what appeared to be an elaborate breakfast. "Good morning, my dear," Elinor greeted her warmly. "I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in years," Meline admitted, accepting the cup of coffee her aunt offered. "Is Danny awake?" "Mr. Young has been up for hours," Elinor replied with a small smile. I found him in the garden at dawn, splitting kindling as a way to earn his keep, he said. I've sent him to the market with a list of things we need. He should return shortly. Meline felt a twinge of disappointment at missing him, which she tried to hide from her perceptive aunt. Now, Elinor said, guiding Meline to a seat at the kitchen table. Let's talk about your future, shall we? What are your plans now that you're here? The direct question caught Meline off guard. She had been so focused on escaping her father that she hadn't given much thought to what came after. I'm not sure, she admitted. I thought perhaps I could find work. I can read and write well, and I'm good with figures. Elinor nodded approvingly. Those are valuable skills, but there's no rush to decide. You're welcome to stay with me for as long as you wish. She hesitated, then added, And what of Mr. Young? What are his plans? Meline felt heat rise to her cheeks. We haven't discussed it. He offered to see me safely here, that's all. Is it? Elinor's eyes were knowing. The way he looks at you suggests there might be more to it than simple chivalry. Before Meline could respond, the back door opened, and Danny himself appeared, arms laden with packages from the market. He stopped short when he saw Meline, a smile breaking across his face that made her heart skip a beat. Morning, he said, setting his burdens on the counter. Hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Elinor assured him. We were just discussing future plans. Please join us. Danny pulled up a chair, accepting a cup of coffee from the maid with a grateful nod. There was something different about him this morning, a relaxed quality that Meline hadn't seen before, as if some burden had eased during the night. I was telling Aunt Elinor that we hadn't discussed what comes next, Meline said. For either of us. Danny nodded, his expression turning thoughtful. I've been thinking about that. He glanced at Elinor. Your aunt was kind enough to mention over breakfast that she knows of a small ranch for sale just outside the city. Nothing fancy, but good land with an existing orchard and room for some livestock. Meline felt a flutter of hope. You're thinking of staying in the area. Thinking about it, he confirmed, his eyes meeting hers. Seems like a man could build something worthwhile here, if he had a reason to stay. The implication hung in the air between them, clear enough that Elinor tactfully rose from the table, murmuring something about checking on breakfast preparations. Left alone, Meline found herself suddenly shy. Is that what you want, Danny, to start over here? He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. What I want, he said quietly, is to see where this road leads, with you, if that's something you might want too. The simple declaration, so honest and direct, brought tears to Medeline's eyes. After years of her father's manipulation and control, Danny's approach offering a choice, not making demands, was like fresh air after being too long underground. I'd like that very much, she whispered. His smile then was like sunrise, transforming his face from handsome to breathtaking. I was hoping you'd say that. They were still smiling at each other when Elinor returned, a knowing look in her eye as she took in their joined hands. I take it you've reached some decisions, she asked, arching an eyebrow. Danny cleared his throat. Yes, madam. With your blessing, I'd like to court your niece properly. Elinor's smile was warm. My blessing is easily given, Mr. Young. You've proven yourself a man of honor and courage. But, she added, her expression turning serious, there is the matter of Victor Hayes to consider. Men like him don't simply give up when thwarted. The reminder of her father cast a shadow over Medeline's newfound happiness. You think he'd follow me all the way to San Francisco? I wouldn't put it past him, Danny said grimly, but we'll be ready if he does. Indeed we will, Elinor agreed. I may be an old woman, but I still have friends in this city, influential friends who would take a dim view of a man threatening his daughter's life. The confidence in her aunt's voice was reassuring, but Meline couldn't quite shake her unease. Victor Hayes was nothing if not persistent. If he was determined to find her, to punish her for defying him, he would find a way. As if reading her thoughts, Danny squeezed her hand. "Don't borrow trouble, Meline. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. That's a promise." And looking into his steady blue eyes, Meline found she believed him believed in the future they might build together, if given the chance. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Medeline's life. San Francisco proved to be everything her mother had described, and more, a vibrant, bustling city full of opportunities and new experiences. Under Alina's guidance, Meline shed her prairie roots, trading her borrowed dress for a modest but fashionable wardrobe befitting a young woman in the city. Danny, true to his word, began courting her properly. They took walks along the bay, attended concerts in the park, and shared long conversations over coffee in Alina's garden. He purchased the small ranch Alina had mentioned, 15 acres with an aging but solid farmhouse, fruit trees, and enough pasture for the horses he hoped to raise. "It's not much compared to what I had in Texas," he told Meline as he showed her the property for the first time. "But it's a start. Something to build on." And build he did, with an energy that impressed even Alina. Within a month, he had repaired the farmhouse, planted a vegetable garden, and acquired 2 brood mares to start his horse breeding operation. He hired a local boy to help with the heavier work, but most of the labor he did himself, returning to Alina's house each evening tired but visibly satisfied with his progress. Meline found her own place in this new life, helping Alina with her dressmaking business and discovering a talent for design that surprised them both. For the first time, she was earning her own money, making her own decisions, and experiencing the simple joy of being valued for her mind and abilities. As summer turned to fall, Danny became a fixture at Alina's dinner table, his quiet presence a comfortable addition to their household. The attraction between him and Meline deepened into something more profound, a partnership based on mutual respect and growing affection. It was on a crisp October evening, as they walked through the garden after dinner, that Danny finally gave voice to what had been building between them. "I love you, Meline," he said simply, stopping beneath an apple tree heavy with ripening fruit. "I think I've loved you since that day in paradise, when you stood up to your father even though you were afraid." Medeline's heart soared at the declaration, though part of her had known it was coming. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling right and true on her lips. "More than I thought possible." He took her hands in his expression serious. "I know it hasn't been long and I'm not a wealthy man. The ranch is still more promise than profit, but I'd like to marry you if you'll have me." The proposal was characteristically Danny, straightforward, honest, without flourish but full of genuine feeling. Meline didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, smiling through sudden tears. "I'd like that very much." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, a smile playing at his lips. "I should speak to your aunt," he said. "Ask for her blessing." "She'll give it," Meline assured him. "She adores you, though she tries to hide it behind that stern exterior." They returned to the house hand in hand, finding Alina in the sitting room with her account books. She looked up as they entered, taking in their glowing faces with a knowing smile. "I take it congratulations are in order," she said, setting aside her work. Danny cleared his throat. "Madam, I'd like your blessing to marry your niece." Alina rose, approaching them with dignified grace. "My blessing you have, without reservation." She embraced Meline warmly, then extended her hand to Danny, who took it in both of his. "You've brought light back to my niece's eyes, Mr. Young. I couldn't ask for more." They agreed on a December wedding, small and intimate, with only a leaner and a few close friends in attendance. The timing would allow Danny to complete the most pressing renovations on the farmhouse before bringing Meline home as his bride. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of preparations. Meline and Alina worked together on a simple but elegant wedding dress, while Danny threw himself into readying the farmhouse for his bride. They were so engrossed in their happiness, in their plans for the future, that the threat of Victor Hayes faded to a distant shadow in their minds, until the telegram arrived. It came on a rainy November afternoon, delivered by a boy who left it with Alina's maid. The message was brief but chilling. Found you stop coming for what's mine. Stop. There was no signature, but none was needed. Victor Hayes had discovered Meline's whereabouts, and he was coming to San Francisco. The news cast a pall over the household. Danny wanted to send Meline and Alina away until the threat passed, but both women refused. "I won't run anymore," Meline said firmly. "This is my home now, my life. I won't let him take that from me." Alina was equally adamant. "We face this together as a family." "Besides," she added with a steely glint in her eye, "I have lived in this city for 20 years. I have friends in the police department, in city government. Victor Hayes is not the only one with connections." Danny looked from one determined woman to the other and sighed. "At least let me stay here until this is resolved," he requested. "I don't like the idea of you two alone in this house if he comes." They agreed to this compromise, and Danny moved his few belongings into Alina's guest room that very evening. The city police were alerted to the potential threat, and Alina's influential friends ensured that patrols in the neighborhood were increased. Days passed with no sign of Victor. The tension in the household gradually eased, though Danny remained vigilant, checking locks and windows each night before retiring. Preparations for the wedding continued, albeit with a more subdued air. It was a week before the wedding when he finally came. Meline was alone in the house, Alina having gone to a fitting with a client and Danny at the ranch, overseeing the delivery of new furniture for their home. The knock at the door was sharp, authoritative. Through the colored glass panels, Meline could see the silhouette of a man in a hat. She hesitated, hand on the doorknob. "Who is it?" she called. "Police, miss," came the reply. "Just checking in as requested by Mrs. Hayes." Relieved, Meline opened the door only to find herself facing not a police officer but Victor Hayes. His face was thinner than she remembered, his eyes harder, but the malevolent smile was unmistakable. "Hello, daughter," he said, pushing past her into the foyer. "Aren't you going to invite your father in?" Meline's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to stand her ground. "You're not welcome here. Please leave." Victor laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. "Not welcome? In my own daughter's home? I'm hurt, truly." "This isn't my home," Meline said, edging toward the sitting room where she knew Alina kept a small revolver in her desk. "It's my aunt's. And she'll be back any moment. With that cowboy of yours, no doubt." Victor's face darkened. "I've heard all about him. Turned my own daughter against me, has he?" "You did that yourself," Meline countered, finding courage in her anger, "when you threatened to kill me for wanting my own life." Victor waved a dismissive hand. "A figure of speech, nothing more. You were always too sensitive." His eyes narrowed. "Now, where's my money? The $300 you stole from me. Return it, and perhaps I'll consider forgiving your indiscretions." Meline stared at him in disbelief. After everything, the pursuit, the threats, the gunfire, it still came down to money for him. Not her welfare, not her happiness, just the money. "It wasn't yours," she said quietly. "It was Mother's. And it's gone now, spent on my journey here, on building a new life free from you." Victor's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" He lunged forward, grabbing her arm with bruising force. You'll come back to paradise with me. Now, I'll show you what happens to daughters who defy their fathers." Meline struggled against his grip, fear and anger coursing through her in equal measure. "Let go of me, or what?" Victor sneered. "You'll scream. There's no one to hear you, girl, no one to save you now. That's where you're wrong." The voice from the doorway was cold as steel and familiar enough to make Madeline's heart leap with relief. Danny stood on the threshold, his revolver aimed squarely at Victor's chest. "Let her go," he ordered, his voice deadly calm. "Now." Victor's grip on Madeline's arm tightened. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. A father has rights over his daughter." "Not this daughter," Danny replied, stepping into the house. "Not anymore." For a tense moment, Victor hesitated, assessing the man before him. Then, with a suddenness that caught Meline off guard, he shoved her aside and reached for the gun concealed beneath his coat. Danny was faster. His revolver barked once, the sound deafening in the confined space of the foyer. Victor staggered backward, clutching his shoulder where blood blossomed dark against his shirt. "You shot me," he gasped, disbelief warring with pain on his face. "You actually shot me." "Be grateful I aimed for your shoulder," Danny said coolly, keeping his revolver trained on the wounded man. "Next time I won't be so merciful." Victor slumped against the wall, the fight gone out of him in the face of Danny's deadly competence. "You wouldn't kill an unarmed man," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "I told you once before," Danny replied, his eyes cold. "Threaten her life, and you answer to me. That hasn't changed." The sound of carriage wheels on the street outside heralded Alina's return. Moments later, she burst through the door, taking in the scene with remarkable composure. "I see you've met my future nephew-in-law," she said to Victor, her tone conversational despite the tension in the room. "I was hoping to avoid this particular family reunion, but since you're here..." She turned to Danny. "The police, already sent for," he confirmed, "should be here any minute." As if on cue, the sound of whistles and running feet approached the house. 2 policemen appeared in the doorway, alerted by neighbors who had heard the gunshot. What followed was a flurry of explanations and official statements. Victor, his wound bandaged by one of the officers, was taken into custody not just for his assault on Meline, but for outstanding warrants from Nevada territory. It seemed his gambling had finally caught up with him. As the police carriage pulled away with Victor inside, Meline felt a curious mixture of relief and sadness. The man being taken away was not the father she remembered from her childhood. That man had died with her mother. This bitter, angry shell was a stranger to her, and she found she could let him go without regret. "Are you all right?" Danny asked, his arm protective around her shoulders. She nodded, leaning into his strength. "I am now. It's over, isn't it? Really over?" "Yes," he assured her. "The police sergeant said he's wanted in 3 territories. He'll be behind bars for years." Alina approached, her face grave with concern. "My dear, what a dreadful ordeal. Are you certain you're not hurt?" "I'm fine, Aunt Alina," Meline assured her. "Thanks to Danny." Alina's gaze shifted to Danny, warmth replacing concern. "It seems we are indebted to you once again, Mr. Young." Danny shook his head. "Family takes care of its own," he said simply, "and we're going to be family soon enough." The wedding took place as planned, on a clear December day with just enough chill in the air to justify the roaring fire in Alina's sitting room. Meline wore the gown she and her aunt had created, ivory satin with pearl beading that caught the light as she moved. Danny, in a new suit that Alina had insisted on providing, looked so handsome it nearly took Medeline's breath away. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Alina and a handful of close friends looking on as Meline and Danny exchanged vows. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Danny's kiss was both tender and promising, a perfect balance that seemed to symbolize the man himself. The small reception that followed was warm and joyful, with enough food and champagne to satisfy even Aliner's exacting standards. As the afternoon waned, Danny took Madeline's hand, leading her away from the well-wishers to a quiet corner of the garden. "Happy?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "More than I thought possible," she replied honestly. "A few months ago I was trapped in a life I hated, afraid to even dream of something better. Now look at us." Danny smiled, the rare, full smile that transformed his face and made her heart race. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "A wedding gift." He placed a small velvet pouch in her palm. Inside, Madeline found a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. When she opened it, she gasped. On one side was a miniature daguerreotype of her mother, smiling in a way Madeline hadn't seen since before her illness. "How did you—" "Your aunt had it," Danny explained. "It was taken years ago when your mother visited San Francisco. Alina thought you should have it." Tears blurred Madeline's vision as she looked at her mother's face. "It's perfect. Thank you." Danny fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. "I wish I could have known her," he said softly. "She must have been remarkable to raise a daughter like you." The simple statement, so heartfelt and genuine, filled Madeline with a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "She would have loved you," she told him, "for seeing me as I am, not as someone to be controlled, for standing beside me, not in front of me." "Always," he promised, drawing her into his arms. "For as long as we both shall live." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Danny and Madeline bid farewell to their guests and departed for their new home. The farmhouse, transformed by Danny's hard work, welcomed them with warm lamplight and the promise of a future built together. Standing in the doorway of what was now their home, Madeline was struck by how far she had come from that desperate day in paradise when she'd collided with a stranger in an alley. Fear had driven her, then fear of her father, fear of a life unlived. Now, love guided her steps, love freely given and received, love that respected and uplifted. "Welcome home, Mrs. Young," Danny said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Madeline laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," he murmured, setting her down gently in the front hall. "So do I." That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Madeline traced the contours of Danny's face with her fingertips, memorizing every line and plane. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm grateful," she replied softly. "For you, for this life we're building. For the day you said then he'll answer to me and changed everything." Danny smiled, drawing her closer. "Best decision I ever made." And as she drifted to sleep in her husband's arms, Meline Hayes Young knew with absolute certainty that it had been the best decision for both of them. Their life together unfolded with the changing seasons, spring bringing new growth to their orchard, summer filling the pastures with wildflowers, and the sound of foals nickering to their mothers. Danny's horse breeding business prospered, his eye for good bloodlines and gentle training methods earning him a reputation that brought buyers from as far away as Oregon. Madeline found her own path, turning her talent for design into a small but successful business creating wedding gowns for San Francisco's young brides. Working from a sun-filled room Danny had added to the farmhouse, she could balance her creative work with the demands of their growing family. For their family did grow. A year after their wedding, Madeline gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after the sheriff who had helped them escape Victor's pursuit. 2 years later, a daughter joined their household, Catherine Alina, named for Danny's long-lost sister and Madeline's beloved aunt. Elena remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting often and doting on her grand-niece and nephew. She never remarried, claiming she was too set in her ways, but the sparkle in her eye when a certain silver-haired judge called at her house told a different story. Of Victor Hayes, they heard little. He served 5 years in prison for fraud and outstanding warrants before being released. A terse letter arrived shortly after Catherine's birth, containing nothing but a newspaper clipping announcing his remarriage to a widow in Sacramento. Meline read it once, then consigned it to the fire. The past was the past, and she had chosen to live in the present. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Danny surprised Meline with a trip to the theater in San Francisco, followed by dinner at the elegant Palace Hotel. As they sipped champagne in the hotel's grand court, surrounded by potted palms and the gentle music of a string quartet, Danny raised his glass in a toast. "To the bravest woman I know," he said, his eyes warm with love. "Who taught me that home isn't a place, but a feeling." Meline smiled, remembering their conversation so many years ago in the mountains outside Paradise. "To the man who stood beside me when I needed it most," she returned, "and every day since." Later, as they strolled arm in arm along the gaslit streets toward Elena's house, where they would spend the night before returning to the ranch, Meline leaned her head against Danny's shoulder. "You ever think about how different our lives might have been if we hadn't met that day?" she asked. Danny was quiet for a moment, considering. "I try not to dwell on might-have-beens," he finally said. "But I do know this. The moment I saw you in that alley, something changed inside me, as if some part of me recognized you even then." The sentiment, so simply expressed but so profound, brought tears to Medeline's eyes. "I felt it too," she admitted. "I was so afraid, so desperate, but something made me trust you. And I'll spend the rest of my life earning that trust," he promised, drawing her close for a kiss that held all the passion of their early days together, tempered now by the deeper bond of shared experiences and mutual respect. As they continued their walk through the city that had become their home, Meline reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate escape to a life rich with purpose and love, a life she had claimed for herself, with Danny by her side. Her father had threatened her life, and Danny had said, "Then he'll answer to me." Simple words that had changed everything. Not because Danny had rescued her, though in many ways he had, but because he had seen her worth when she was struggling to see it herself. He had stood beside her, not in front of her, allowing her to find her own strength, her own voice. And in doing so, they had both found something neither had expected. A love that did not diminish but enhanced who they were, separately and together. A partnership of equals, built on respect and understanding. A family, created through choice rather than obligation. As they reached Elena's house, where lights burned welcomingly in the windows, Danny paused on the walkway, drawing Meline into his arms one more time. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Young," he murmured against her lips. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Young," she replied, her heart as full as it had ever been. "Here's to many more." And there would be many more years filled with challenges and triumphs, with laughter and occasionally tears, with the joys of watching their children grow, and the satisfaction of building something lasting together. Years in which Meline never forgot the courage it had taken to leave Paradise, and Danny never regretted the decision to help a frightened young woman escape her father's control. Years in which they both understood with absolute certainty that the best decisions are often made in the most unexpected moments, like when a cowboy says, "Then he'll answer to me," and changes 2 lives forever.